Elliot's eyes widened as he stared at the DSS's visual feed. A large ship had materialized near the alien station, seemingly emerging from some form of faster-than-light travel. Drones swarmed out of the station immediately, engaging the new arrival, but it was a futile effort. Their weapons had no effect, deflected harmlessly by what appeared to be a powerful energy shield. Those drones didn't stand a chance. Protocol was explicit. Elliot was not permitted to interfere. This could be part of a larger conflict, a war, a political dispute, one that humanity couldn't afford to stumble into. Intervening risked dragging Earth into battles it couldn't win, alliances it couldn't predict. Elliot clenched his fist, shaking his head as his hand moved to engage the MSD at full power. "Protocol be damned," he muttered. "What kind of message would it send if humanity did nothing?" Deep down, Elliot knew this wasn't his reason for acting, just a justification. He didn't really care, though. He felt a kinship with the mysterious aliens he had been communicating with. He wasn't going to let them die. The TFS Ishtar roared into action as the MSD broke the laws of the universe. Her mass now equal to the square root of -1, she rapidly accelerated beyond the speed of light. Elliot's mind was racing almost as fast as his ship. The Ishtar was well armed, but he had no idea if her weapons could penetrate the alien ship's shields. As he neared the station, his scanner feed updated. The alien ship's main weapon fired, releasing 2 plasma bolts that homed in and struck an important-looking part of the station. Elliot stared, dumbfounded. Their weapons were centuries ahead of anything he had. "Their weapons," he whispered, his thoughts coalescing into a risky plan. When the Ishtar arrived at the station and the MSD deactivated, the battle was already over. The station's drones had been annihilated, and the alien ship was already swiveling its main weapon toward the Ishtar. Elliot wasted no time, slamming the thrusters to maximum. The Ishtar surged forward, her sublight engines roaring to life. Twin plasma bolts erupted from the alien vessel, screaming through the void toward the Ishtar. Elliot braced himself, waiting until the last moment before activating the topside emergency thrusters. These small chemical propellants, strategically placed across the hull, would react violently when mixed, practically exploding a ship onto a new trajectory. The Ishtar shook as the explosive force shoved it downward, shaking the entire cockpit. Elliot's harness strained to keep him in place as the plasma bolts blazed overhead, close enough to heat the air inside the cabin. Sweat beaded on Elliot's forehead from both the heat and the stress as he checked the rear cameras. The plasma bolts streaked onward briefly, then curved back, locked onto his ship. His attention returned forward. The alien vessel loomed larger now, its silhouette dominating his view more and more as the Ishtar got closer to this mysterious foe. Elliot killed the thrusters and keyed a series of buttons. All over the hull, panels slid back and weapons emerged. As the weapons extended into position, Elliot turned the Ishtar around, rotating her nose opposite to her trajectory. Without propulsion, the ship was carried onward by her momentum. Now moving backward, the Ishtar passed beneath the alien vessel. The moment his ship cleared the enemy's underbelly, Elliot engaged both the main and ventral thrusters. The main thrusters fought to negate the Ishtar's existing momentum, while the ventral thrusters pushed her upward. The Ishtar came to a standstill a few hundred meters from her foe, who was now directly between the Ishtar and the plasma bolts that were pursuing her. It was a gamble, but it was the only shot he had. The plasma bolts collided with the pirate ship. The ship's shields flared bright white, struggling to withstand the impact before collapsing under the weight of its own weapon. The weapons that had emerged from the Ishtar roared to life, 2 large guns on top of the ship unleashing a storm of relentless firepower. The barrage struck the pirate ship's hull with merciless brutality, tearing through its armor. Sensors made to collect research data on a gravitational anomaly struggled to track the scale of the onslaught as each successive impact hammered deeper into the pirate vessel. Trevok froze as he watched, his eyes wide in disbelief. "What are these?" he muttered, trying to comprehend the scale of the destruction unfolding before him. The pirate ship's shields had already failed against its own plasma weapon, and now its hull was being torn apart with relentless precision. Suddenly, dozens of missiles launched from 5 different locations all over the Ishtar's hull, disappearing into the hole that had been torn open. "Reactor breach!" Hasara's voice rang out moments later, sharp and panicked. Her eyes were fixed on her screen, her feathers bristling with a mix of awe and horror. The pirate ship seemed to collapse in on itself before being consumed by a massive fireball. A violent explosion ripped through the vessel, its remnants scattering into the void as the shockwave rocked the station. Kralvek's claws gripped the edges of his console, trying to keep himself stable as the entire station shook. "One ship did this?" His words held a mix of disbelief and cautious admiration. Trevok's tail flicked in awe, still processing what he had witnessed. "An explorer," he muttered, his voice low with a mix of awe and confusion. "They said they were an explorer, and yet this?" Hasara's gaze softened slightly, the initial shock fading into something more reflective. "They saved us," she said quietly as she watched the debris of the pirate ship drifting through space. Trevok nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to the now silent Ishtar. "They're more than just an explorer." "Must be," he said, his tone lined with curiosity. "I think we were about to initiate communications before those pirates arrived. We should do so now." Kralvek quickly tapped a sequence of buttons on the main console, the station's communication systems flickering. The pirate attack had damaged the station's main communication array, but the short-range systems were still operational. He attempted to contact the Ishtar multiple times, but no response came. The trio fell into a tense silence, their attention still fixed on the Ishtar. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the ship began to shift. Slowly, deliberately, it turned and began to glide toward the largest landing pad on the station. "That's the landing pad," Trevok said, his voice quiet but concerned. "Could it have been damaged in the explosion?" Kralvek studied the ship's movement closely. There was no mistaking it. The Ishtar was injured, but it seemed determined to land. He let out a low hiss, his claws tapping thoughtfully against the console. "We'll have to prepare. When it lands, we make contact, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The sudden explosion had hit like a battering ram. Elliot guided the wounded Ishtar carefully toward what he believed to be a landing pad. The massive ship, weighing over 1,800 tons and measuring over 160 meters long, was already a challenge to maneuver. But the damage she had sustained made every movement even more sluggish and unpredictable. Her thrusters were compromised, and the controls seemed less responsive than usual. His hand hovered over the thruster controls, making small, cautious adjustments as the ship crept forward, her movements stiff and uncooperative. Finally, with a groan from the ship's overburdened frame, the landing gears touched down with a soft clunk, magnetizing to the surface. Elliot exhaled, letting out a sigh of relief as he leaned back in his seat. The trio watched as a large figure walked down the ramp that had extended from the Ishtar. Recalling some of the contents of the data they had received, Hasara raised one of her wings and waved it back and forth. The figure paused for a moment before reciprocating the gesture, then resumed its approach. As it came closer, they could see more and more through the transparent plate on the front of what looked to be its helmet. Its skin was a beige tone, with what looked like black fur on top of its head and shorter black fur along the bottom of its face. Kralvek stepped forward cautiously as he activated his translator. "Greetings," he said. The device rendered his words into the language transmitted to them earlier. "We are researchers aboard this station." The figure paused again a few paces away, seemingly recognizing the familiar language. "Hello," it replied in a voice the trio recognized from their earlier communications. "I presume you are the ones I've been in contact with?" Seeing the being in person, a life form from an unknown species who had risked itself to save them, was both humbling and surreal. "Yes," Kralvek said, inclining his head slightly. "I am Kralvek Toynar. These are my colleagues, Hesara Quarrel and Trevok Dalnar. We are researchers aboard this station." Hesara ruffled her feathers lightly, her gaze switching between the figure and the massive ship it had emerged from. "You are Elliot Kane?" she asked hesitantly, though the answer was already clear. The figure nodded. "That's correct. Explorer and pilot of the TFS Ishtar. It's good to finally meet you in person." "It's an honor," Trevok said, his voice measured and firm, his posture straight as he regarded the human with focused attention. Your actions saved us from certain doom. You went beyond what any obligation required. Elliot waved a hand dismissively, his demeanor calm yet approachable. Well, what would it have said about humanity if I just left you guys to die? He chuckled briefly, though his expression quickly turned more serious. That said, I have to ask, what was that all about? Did I just drag humanity into some kind of interstellar war? Kralvek shook his head firmly, his tone resolute. No, the ones who attacked us were pirates. Independent raiders seeking resources. They act for their own gain, not on behalf of any government or state. Hasara nodded in agreement. Pirates operate independently with no ties to the major galactic powers. Your intervention saved us and will not escalate into larger conflicts. Elliot exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Good. I was somewhat worried I sparked some kind of galactic incident. Hasara's feathers flared slightly in concern as she looked at the massive ship behind Elliot. The Ishtar? Was it damaged by the reactor breach? Elliot hesitated for a moment, glancing back at his ship. Was that what I hit? He chuckled softly. She's seen better days. Comms and FTL are completely down and about half the systems are damaged. He paused before adding, She can fly, but she won't even get close to a fraction of the speed of light. He sighed. I'm stuck in this system until something changes. Do you have a way to call for help? The trio exchanged uneasy glances. Kralvek's ears twitched in frustration before he answered. Our long-range communications array was destroyed in the attack. Only short-range transmissions are possible now. Elliot frowned, nodding slowly. That's not ideal. Someone will come looking for you eventually, though, right? Hasara gave a small nod. Yes. If we fail to report in, a vessel will be dispatched to investigate, but it may take some time. Trevok's claws flexed as he considered this. Perhaps I could assist in repairing your communications systems. If we can restore enough of their functionality, we might be able to reach your people. Elliot's expression softened, his gratitude evident. That'd be a huge help. But for now, I think we all need to take a moment to catch our breath. Kralvek nodded, his tail flicking slightly in acknowledgement. We will return to the station shortly to assess the damage to the station and prepare for what comes next. Elliot glanced back at the Ishtar, its battered hull reflecting the stark lights of the landing pad. We don't know if human life is compatible with your guy's atmosphere, so I'll stay with my ship for now. Feels like the safest option given the circumstances. Hasara's feathers shifted, and she regarded him for a moment before inclining her head. If you require assistance, you can find us within the station. For now, I agree that rest seems like the best course. With that, the trio began making their way back toward the station, and Elliot turned back toward the Ishtar. Once back in the station, Hasara let out a deep sigh. The trio was quiet as they all processed what had happened. The past 2 months had been a whirlwind of activity. Elliot and Trevok had managed to repair the Ishtar's FTL communications just enough to send messages, though it couldn't receive any. He had sent a detailed report of first contact to Earth. Someone in the Terran federal government must have had a rather exciting day when they were the one to receive the report. Meanwhile, he and the alien researchers discovered that the station's atmosphere was compatible with human life, allowing him to roam the station and get to know the aliens he would come to consider his friends. Elliot had taught his new friends how to play poker, though he was starting to regret it. Just as he was about to reveal his hand, a disastrously weak one, humanity made its grand entrance. A small fleet of Terran ships entered the system, bringing a small army of delegates, officials, diplomats, scientists, and more. It was a spectacular sight, but no one at the table noticed. Kralvek had called Elliot's bluff, and the Ixar had one hell of a poker face. Elliot muttered a curse under his breath as he laid down his losing hand. The Ixar's amber eyes gleamed as he swept up the small pile of makeshift chips with a calm, deliberate grace. Bad luck, Kralvek said, his tone as dry as the desert. Hasara trilled a laugh, her melodic voice cutting through the tension. I warned you he'd see through you, Elliot. You might be able to fool me and Trevok, but him? She leaned back, her plumage shifting with the motion. Trevok gave a rumbling chuckle, his tail flicking behind him. Perhaps humans weren't made for subtlety. Elliot opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by a beep from his comm device. The fleet had established contact. In the following days, the system became a hub of activity. During a tense meeting with representatives from the Terran Federation, Elliot had faced significant backlash for his decision to violate first contact protocols. Intervening in a conflict he had known nothing about had put humanity at risk of being dragged into a war. But when the diplomats realized the positive galactic attention his actions had brought, the criticism quickly died down. In fact, Elliot's heroism was becoming something of a diplomatic boon. The research station, once an underfunded dump only held together by the diligent work of the 3 scientists it housed, was now teeming with construction crews and equipment, being fixed up and renovated as delegations arrived from across the galaxy. The Interstellar Assembly and the Coalition of Worlds sent envoys, each eager to convince the Terran Federation to join their respective factions. Meanwhile, officials from the galactic community began identifying all systems within 100 light-years of Sol. These would immediately fall under Terran jurisdiction in accordance with galactic common law. In the meantime, the Ishtar had been brought aboard a larger Terran ship and repaired, after which Elliot had landed her back at the station. Both to go see his friends again, and because delegations from 3 member states of the Assembly had insisted on meeting Elliot personally, on account of him having saved one of each of their people. The Silvaris Conclave, Hasara's homeland, had presented Elliot with a delicate wind chime crafted from their native crystalline alloys. The chime, a common feature in Silvaris homes, produced soft, harmonious tones whenever it swayed. It was a symbol of connection and creativity, embodying the foreign belief in finding beauty in life's quiet moments. The Voringsal Accord, Kralvek's people, had offered a small meditation sphere carved from Sharaite, a material known for its durability and tranquil sheen. It had been inscribed with a simple yet elegant pattern symbolizing balance, a reflection of Ixar philosophy. The Korask Dominion, home to Trevok's people, the Drathakii, had given Elliot a small, intricately crafted figurine, a representation of a Drathak artisan in mid-creation, chiseling a fine sculpture. The figurine was made of a rare, polished stone native to the Dominion. Each detail, from the determined stance of the sculptor to the delicate patterns in the stone, reflected the Dominion's reverence for mastery and craftsmanship. It was a symbol of dedication to one's craft and an embodiment of Drathak values, commitment, precision, and a lifetime of effort poured into perfecting one's chosen pursuit. Each of these gifts had been given with a decent amount of ceremony around it, and Elliot had to do far more politicking than he liked during those ceremonies. The meaning of the gifts was not lost on him, however, and his promise to take good care of them was one he intended to keep. For now, Elliot wanted to return home for a bit. Having lost 2.5 years of work, he needed to reset and reevaluate. Having said his goodbyes, Elliot strapped himself into the pilot seat of the Ishtar and keyed the launch sequence. The repaired Ishtar gracefully lifted off the platform and retracted her landing gears smoothly. Elliot looked out to the observation deck of the station he had called home for the past few months. He saw Kralvek, Hasara, and Trevok standing there, watching the Ishtar leave. Elliot quickly waved to them one more time, though he knew they couldn't see him through his tinted canopy. The Ishtar carefully left the station and flew into open space, accelerating away from the station. Once the Ishtar was a few kilometers from the station, Elliot began configuring the MSD when he suddenly received a message. "Heard you lost some data. Sincerely, your friends," the message said. A massive file was attached. Elliot began downloading the file to his systems, and his eyes went wide when he realized what he had been given. Exploration data on every single system in the Silvaris Conclave, the Voringsal Accord, and the Korask Dominion, thousands of systems, what would have been centuries of work for any explorer, was now stored on his ship. Elliot pulled himself out of his shock and quickly typed up a final message to send in response. When this had all started, Elliot had transmitted a simple binary string as a way of saying, "Hello, can you understand me?" This time he sent the exact same binary string, but inverted. The exact opposite of that greeting, a final, symbolic goodbye. He would make sure to meet his friends again, but for now he exploration data to turn in. If you love engaging stories like this, Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.